Thank you. Welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon. I'm Richard Fishman. I'm the director of the Creative Arts Council and a professor in the Visual Art Department. And it's a real pleasure for me to introduce Janet Yang this afternoon and to welcome her back to Brown. I met Janet about 10 years ago in Los Angeles. I went to see her because she was in the film entertainment industry, and that 10 years ago was just about the time that my colleagues and I were thinking about, dreaming about this building, and I wanted to make some connections with people in the Los Angeles area who were in film and entertainment, and it took us that long to do this. Janet spent 4, I hope, wonderful years at Brown, where she received her BA degree in Chinese Studies. Later, she received her MBA from Columbia University. Janet is speaking today as part of Brown's ongoing Year of China celebration, during which Brown explores China's culture, its history, people, geography, and its relation to the world. I want to thank Professor Chung-Yi Tan, who has been the chairperson for the Year of China, who is still the chairperson of the Year of China, for which we are very grateful for all he's done for Brown and for bringing this extraordinary program to Brown University. The Granoff Center is proud to host several events during the Year of China, including the exhibition that's in the Cohen Gallery now, and it will be open when you leave if you haven't had a chance to see it. The Year of China initiative aims to explore China's past, its present, and its possibilities for the future through an array of programs across disciplines, including the arts. Tonight's event is part of an exploration of how the arts have flourished over China's long history and how those creations of culture define the present. Janet is one of several artists, filmmakers, and writers and scholars whose visits will illuminate the long trajectory of cultural production in China. Throughout her life, Janet Yang has distinguished herself by serving as a cultural ambassador, whether by bringing the creative and business worlds together or bridging East and West. Her philosophy has always been to find universal themes that bond people, while respecting and celebrating social and cultural differences. This is true of virtually all the work in her expansive, prodigious career as a film producer and executive. As a film producer, Janet Yang has worked with some of the most formidable directors and actors in the world, as well as discovering unique, often unheard voices and stories and bringing them to the mainstream. In the international arena, she has been a pioneer in introducing Asian culture to the West and representing American cinema in China. Janet got her start in production working closely with Steven Spielberg. In 1985, she was hired by Spielberg to be his eyes and ears in China for the filming of the historic production of Empire of the Sun. I'm sure there are some really interesting stories connected with those days in China. She was the liaison to both national and local levels of Chinese governments to secure appropriate shooting permits to help execute the shutting down of practically the entire city of Shanghai. Who could do that? The Year of China's slogan is opening doors, opening minds, and it is with great pleasure that I open our doors to Janet Yang.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I am very honored and very pleased to be here at Brown University. It's been a while. It's been a while. I was going to start tonight with just a little exercise, if I may. I was going to ask everybody to close their eyes and go into as deeply unconscious state as possible, a meditative state, as you will. And then I'm going to throw out a word, and then I want you to come alive and jump out with any words that might come to mind after I say this word. Now, I'm going to try to do something different. I'm hoping everybody will close their eyes, but I'm going to first ask those of you who are born and raised in America, because I see there's a number of people, I believe, from China. I'm going to first ask those of you who are from America to answer my first question, and then I'll turn to those who are from China. Is that all right? Can I do this? I'm just curious. So if you just close your eyes and try to make your mind go blank, and then when I say something, I just want you to shout it. The first thing that comes to mind. China. Big. Whole. Space. Military. Big. Dragon. Lots of people. Okay, nothing else? Not rickshaws or kung fu or whatever. Okay, how about those now who were born and raised in China? If I say America, what comes to mind right away? Obama. Nice air. Hollywood? Okay, interesting. Well, I found that my life has been about discovering these unconscious images and notions that I myself and many other people carry around that are largely formed by film. I think that I found myself in this world of image making because it became apparent to me that I was as influenced and prejudiced really about Asians or other people as anyone, simply because of the images that were fed to me since I grew up on Long Island primarily, a Jewish community. We were the only Chinese family. And to me, China was a very, very distant, dark place. I knew very little about it, despite the fact that my parents were born and raised there. They had come to this country as graduate students. They intended to go back to China, but then 1949 hit and revolution, and then they were told by the relatives it's not a convenient time to go back, and maybe you should wait, and then finally, in fact, the very year I was born, in 1956, there was something called the 100 Flowers Campaign, and it was actually directed at intellectuals and anybody with any foreign connection. So that was when they decided, we are staying in America. And I guess that influenced my upbringing because it was all focused, as opposed to their kind of living in this limbo situation where we're possibly going back to China, waiting for the right time. They decided at the very year I was born, we were going to stay in America. So that was when we dug our heels in, and I really, to blame it on my lack of curiosity, I really didn't ask them very many questions, and I had just shockingly little interest in China, and I had no reason to be interested. There was no way it affected my life, in no way was it relevant. It was completely irrelevant, in fact, except for the occasional Chinese restaurant or whatever. And so I lived this way until I was 16 years old, more or less. And it was that year in 1972 that Nixon, President Nixon at the time, and Kissinger, Secretary of State Kissinger, went unexpectedly to China. And they came back that year, and lo and behold, suddenly this very dark, mysterious place, which people had very little knowledge or interest in, was opening up. Suddenly they came back and said, oh, guess what? You can go to China. And particularly they targeted the Chinese American community. And my mother, working at the United Nations and still being a Chinese citizen, and being able to actually go back on quote-unquote home leave, tending, to see her relatives, was one of the first people to sign up, despite the fact that there was an atmosphere of great tenuousness and fear, really, about this communist country, this mysterious place with a lot of military, with a lot of people wearing the same clothes and walking in formation or whatever. We bit the bullet and decided we'd go back and visit, and my parents would be able to at least see their relatives that they had not said a proper goodbye to since the 40s. It had been quite some time, 35 to 40 years. So that experience of going as a teenager and really experiencing a country that was in every way the extreme opposite of America. It was extremely old. It was at the time extremely poor. It was somewhat of a military state. I had never seen a military personnel, and there they were lined up everywhere in China. It was also a place that was, obviously the political system is extremely different, but it was a place that I felt extremely intrigued by and extremely drawn to for reasons that I can't particularly articulate, except that I felt a pull there because I knew that it was almost by accident that I grew up in America. In fact, I was supposed to grow up in China. They had every intention of going. I would have probably been a Red Guard. I would have probably been marching the streets with a red armband. And this life that was so extremely different from my fairly comfortable one on Long Island was just a small step away from me. And there were my first cousins, my aunts and uncles, who had gone through, who'd led a completely different life. And I suddenly became extremely curious about what would it have been like. So thus began a journey that I feel I'm still on to this day, because that initial curiosity led to my coming to Brown and wanting to study Chinese studies. It led to another fateful decision in 1979 on the part of the politicians, which was to essentially normalize, as they say, relations. Normalize is a funny word, but they were officially now going to recognize China, which meant that there were going to be exchange students and businessmen and journalists that could officially go to China when it had previously been closed off. And I just couldn't wait to get back. There's something in me that said, I'm going there. Again, it was still somewhat mysterious and somewhat frightening, but the Cultural Revolution had ended. And so in 1980, I got on a plane and I went to work for an organization that was the official publishing arm of the government. It was called Waiwunju, the Foreign Languages Press. And I was there to essentially translate and edit works in English for Western consumption. That was their job. And it was China was just at the point where it was beginning to try and become more capitalist in nature and try and actually create works that were going to sell. So I was helping advise them on that. And I was living in a dormitory with virtually no hot running water or heat, and was really trying to be a good proletarian. And what I did discover while I was living there, among many other things, was that I had carried a lot of prejudice about Chinese and about what was possible and not possible, so that when I started seeing television shows and movies with, of course, Chinese people in them, I was so tickled and thrown off. I said, oh, it is really possible. I had this epiphany, because I always thought that we were somehow excluded from being in front of the camera, that it was somehow not possible to do that. I couldn't explain why, but here I was in China, with obviously being part of the majority, and I have a lot to say about what it was like to be discriminated against as a Chinese person. But I suddenly realized that my images and my perceptions had been largely formed by movies and television, and now they were being adjusted by being exposed to so much other media and entertainment that were fully populated by Chinese. And I got very intrigued by this new wave of artists and writers who were exploring their own identity post-Cultural Revolution and just stepping their toe in the water outside of China and trying to absorb what was going on in the rest of the world after being cut off for so long. And I found a lot of these individuals incredibly brave and very, very talented. And I realized if I could bring their works outside of China, not only would it be a showcase for some incredible talent from China, but it would also change how people saw Chinese. If they saw them playing romantic heroes or in, the variety of roles that were representing these films were so thrilling to me. So that kind of became my mission back then. I was like, I'm going to get these films out and I'll figure out a way to do it. So after I graduated from business school, I went to run this company in San Francisco that also wanted to bring films over, and the now very famous directors who were at the time the fifth generation filmmakers like Chen Kaige and Zhang Yimou, who have made such famous movies now like Emperor and Assassin and Pharaoh My Concubine, and Zhang Yimou's films like Hero and Crouching Tiger. Back then, they were making artier movies, which I absolutely loved, and I had the opportunity to expose Chinese cinema and thereby promote China in general and Chinese culture at film festivals and in wider circles, and that was so thrilling to me because it was a different view of China. I had something concrete to show people that was completely, people didn't even know they made films in China. They said, really, they do this? And they actually have emotions, and they actually do heroic things, or are vulnerable and fall in love, or have difficulties in their workplace or whatever. Just the things that are very universal. They were very universal themes that you never saw. If you look at what American television and movies had shown, there was literally not a single Asian character that had any dimension whatsoever. And so this was very thrilling to me that I could now draw from China and present these films. And then doing that job for a while, I suddenly got a call one day from an executive at Universal Studios who wanted to open up the China market. So he wanted me to show he wanted to sell American films to China for the first time. And China had also been not exposed to American cinema. The last films that had officially shown in China were from the 40s. So in their minds, America was still Greta Garbo and, you know, Frank Sinatra, Clark Gable, and so their view of America had not yet been updated. So I found myself in this fascinating position, listening to people on both sides say, oh, well, is America like this? And being, you know, understandably, completely naive about what was going on today. So I was so thrilled to have this tool. And then, as Richard mentioned earlier, I then had the opportunity to work on film, on Steven Spielberg's film. And then I was an executive at Universal, and I thought, oh, well, this is a great opportunity to actually be able to control what goes in front of the camera. So if I can be a producer, then I can actually help execute some changes about the image of Asians on the screen, big screen, little screen. So I thought, well, this all just kind of happened. I was meeting with President Simmons today, and I said, really, when I came to Brown, and they don't mind hearing this at this wonderful school, I had no idea what I was going to do. I fell into the, you know, even my parents were quite worried. Why am I studying Chinese? What is it all going to lead to? But somehow, through just following my passion, I found there were things that I really wanted to do. It was not easily identifiable when I was declaring my major what this would all lead to, but it became something that I essentially created for myself. And maybe that spirit of creating your own independent major or whatever, it helped contributed to my not being too afraid of working it out on my own, because they didn't exist. These jobs simply didn't exist. I was kind of at the right place at the right time. The opportunity was there. So what I have found over the decades now, in all the different films that I've produced, many of them related to China, many are not, is that there is possibility for a paradigm shift, that if you show something in a way, if through good storytelling, if you grip people through good storytelling, and you present characters or stories in a way that are maybe slightly unconventional, people can accept it, and then that becomes part of what they consider the norm. So what we know about China today, I had an interesting conversation today at lunch with some Chinese students who, like me, feel frustrated because what people today know about China is usually so little or so far off from what the reality is. And most people who go for the first time are quite shocked. They usually walk around going, oh my God, I had no idea this is what China was like on so many different levels. Because what do you read about China? You tend to read about the tainted milk and about Tibet and about you know, train wrecks or whatever. And what's missing is what is it really like for most of the people most of the time. And for most of the people most of the time, there is the Tibet issue just doesn't come up, and you know, the tainted milk issue just doesn't come up. It's more, there's a vibrancy to the life there, and I walk around and I see incredible new architecture, and you're eating amazing food, and you're having conversations with people whose lives have flourished there, and it's just very different. That doesn't really come across. So I think one of the reasons that there is, through media and also through movies, we are presented with a set of images and a set of ideas that tend to get embedded. And I guess I'm here to say you can unembed those ideas, or you can change them. It is really possible to people generally are a little lazy. So you feed them something, it's like, okay, that's what it is, and you just take it at face value. And I've just been very excited to find ways. So I can use the example, for instance, of Joy Luck Club. There was a lot of risk, even though this was a novel that I read when it was still in galley form. Well, Amy was still writing. In fact, I had met the editor, and she said, oh, we just bought this book from this writer. It's a first-time writer. We paid more money than we've ever paid for a first-time writer. And she started sending me just chapters that Amy was in the process of writing. And I read this, and all I could think was, oh my God, somebody knows my life. Somebody had gotten inside me and was able to articulate beautifully my experiences. And I had never read that before. I mean, I had, somebody mentioned Maxine Hong Kingston today. She's a great writer, but I couldn't relate to that. There were maybe a couple of other writers. I could never relate to any of the other works that had been published, but this was the first time where I felt this, I could so relate to it. And then who knew that this book would then become a huge bestseller? And I told Amy, even before the book was published, I am going to do everything I can to get this book adapted into a movie. Because for me, it resonated so much with me, I felt like it was going to resonate with other people. And obviously, being Chinese American, it resonated on a specific level, but I felt there were a lot of universal themes that other people could relate to. And lo and behold, years later, after it became a huge bestseller, we got the green light to make the movie, but there was so much resistance. We got so many rejections initially because people couldn't see it. Why couldn't they see it? Because they'd never seen a film with mostly Asian characters. They'd never seen a film with mostly Asian female characters. They had never seen a film that cut back and forth between old and new. They had never seen, they were convinced that a film with a lot of subtitles would never work, and with this unconventional screenplay. And then yet, the film is made, and suddenly it's like, oh, of course that would work. So the hurdles that people expect and the lack of convention that sometimes presents itself can be very challenging. And again, all I can say is that if you take that leap of faith sometimes, you have enough in there to make people comfortable. We couldn't put stars in. There were no stars. We had to even convince people that there were enough good actors to cast the movie with. And I know Wayne said this before, and I would say the same thing. We could have cast 10 Joy Luck Clubs. There were more than enough good actors. It's just that those actors had rarely had the opportunity to showcase their talent. So that became a lesson for me. It's like, it really is possible. Something that I felt early on before was a bestseller could become a movie that could garner a lot of respect and a lot of kudos and did well at the box office. So, and that was able to open up a lot of opportunities. So then people say, oh, well, that was just an anomaly. That was, in a way, it was unfortunately somewhat of an anomaly. But those actresses were able to get more work, and it did open up a lot of opportunities. So I love this idea of constantly holding up a mirror, and the mirror is something that, it's not everybody's mirror, but it's a reflection of something that may not be so obvious, may not have been seen before. It's shining a light on someone or some things or some place that you haven't imagined before. It all can be part of drama. It can all be part of a great story, a narrative that captures your imagination and then gets embedded into your consciousness, and it changes how you then see the world. This information that you take in, you then use to when you look out onto the world. So, I mean, I really did, think that I myself thought, okay, Chinese are nerds, right? That was the common thing when I was growing up, and so I was like hiding from the nerddom and this, and then to see a Bruce Lee movie, or then to see that, Li Ning at the Olympics, being a very, a great-looking Chinese guy in primetime TV, that changes people. And then to find that you are, in magazines, suddenly you see this. So these images all contribute to how a person thinks. So in the course of deciding what movies to make, especially in this last decade, as there became, especially post-Olympics and post Shanghai World Expo, now China's finally really in the news, and I think a lot of people are more interested, and it's about what are the images that are coming out. And now more than ever, I think it's a great time to bring out stories from China and reflect what is going on there today, to talk about how Americans perceive China, but also what it's like for students to come to America. So one of the films that I ended up making several years ago was a movie called Dark Matter, and it focuses on a Chinese exchange student and what his experience is like when he comes to the United States. It's based on a true story. And in addition to it reflecting we think what life is like for grad students, the particulars, the nuances of a Chinese student who comes over who's under a lot of pressure. Back then, it was a different, in the 90s when students came out, there were far fewer and they were under a lot of pressure. And so what was it really like for them to examine that and then to find, you know, maybe a lot of graduate students can relate to that kind of pressure, to academic politics, whatever. So if you can examine one life and then find there are universal themes right behind that many people can then relate to. So that was a film that showed Chinese here. I'm also extremely interested in reflecting what China is like today, because I think a lot of the images that people have about China are very old. Most of the movies that have been made in recent years about China are period movies. They're people flying around in big, colorful robes across, you know, with wire work. They are, I use the example, even a movie like Karate Kid, which is technically set in contemporary Beijing. If you go to Beijing, you will see that everywhere you look are high-rises. It's impossible not to see a high-rise. How did they make a movie that's set in Beijing today where you never see that? So that tells me they were intentionally looking for a China that doesn't exist anymore, or that existed a long time ago, which is very old, just alleyways and a very a much more backward China. This is somehow they were really reinforcing an old image rather than showing how it is today. They decided they had to do that, which is strange to me. Why would they do it? Otherwise, I thought it was a very entertaining movie, but I couldn't understand why wouldn't they want to show Beijing as it is today. So my little mission has been, let's find good stories. Let's not get stuck in these stereotypes. Let's not, you know, because they're the ones that have been fed us over the years, let's not recycle the old ones so that people still think there are rickshaws in China, or still think there's military presence everywhere, or still think this and don't get a sense of the life there as it really is. And the same with America. There's, you know, inevitably, because China and America were worlds apart, the farther the distance, the more there tends to be a fantasy. So I know when I was in China in 1972 and I was helping my cousins with their English homework, I opened up their textbook and it said, "Down with American imperialists" and "Down with American paper tigers." So I know there were definitely some very deep-seated images of what America was about, and I've seen how that's changed. I was relaying to somebody in a movie that I made, which was the Chinese version of High School Musical. All our actors, they were playing for me the latest Beyonce songs and Lady Gaga and Justin Timberlake. These were their idols now, and they were completely up to date with American pop culture, much so, more so than I was. And this is what we are giving them now. These are the cultural icons that have been exported and they're absorbing, and this is the America that they also are very drawn to, the music and the movies. So I feel more dedicated than ever using this medium. Mine happens to be film. Television is also very powerful, but I think film in particular, because you're watching it in a dark theater with no other distractions. I find when I'm watching television, I get very easily distracted, and I go and get something to eat, and then I might make a phone call, whatever. But I love going to the movies because I love sitting in that dark room with no distractions, where I know I'm being worked on in subconscious ways, in ways that I couldn't even, you know, articulate. And I know those things are working on my system, and I feel that most people are susceptible to that. So I try to be very careful about what I put out there, because I feel that it will work its voodoo on you and its magic. Perhaps I know one of the things I want to do tonight, if now is an appropriate time, is in this ongoing effort to present, again, new images of China. There's a movie that I recently shot, which is not finished at all. It has not been seen by anyone. It hasn't had all the other post-production work, which some of you may know about, such as doing the final sound mix adding what we call ADR, which is some of the voiceovers that you have to add in. None of the permanent music, none of the visual effects shot. In other words, we're just at the picture cutting stage. We're just sort of finalizing the picture cut. After that's finished, then a lot of other work is done to it. So I, at the risk of of exposing something too soon and hoping you understand what it's like to see a rougher version of a movie without final music, I put together 3 discrete scenes of the movie, and I'll tell you a little bit about it so you understand the context. The movie is called America Town, Shanghai. The Chinese name is actually 纽约客, at sign, Shanghai, which is a New Yorker in Shanghai. And this was kind of putting I have seen in recent years a incredible migration of foreigners to China. When I was living there in the 80s, there was a handful of foreigners living in Beijing. We all congregated at the one place where you can congregate. It was the lobby of the Peking Hotel, where they served fresh squeezed orange juice, and you saw people from all over the world, and it was a tiny, tiny, tiny group, and some lived in the Friendship Hotel, and some, like me, lived on the dormitory, but it was, you could literally count the number of places of where the foreigners lived. Now the cities of Beijing, Shanghai, and many other they're so internationally, you couldn't even begin. I mean, and the flow, I was very much self-conscious when I lived there back then, because if I was seen with a Caucasian person, they always assumed I was local, and I was blocked from entering hotels and from entering the embassy because they always treated me like a local person. I was getting into discussions every day and said, no, I'm really American, I'm an American passport, and and it was really highly uncomfortable because the worlds were incredibly bifurcated. And today you go and there's simply nobody even looks twice. You could be from anywhere, speaking any language, and it's incredibly international. So I've watched this incredible migration of people to China, and people who are living there extremely comfortably, very happy. They've raised families there. Their children go to school there. Their children grow up speaking perfect Chinese. And I'm saying I'm talking about families who are, again, from Europe, from America, from Canada, and they have very full lives there. And yet, back here in America, the notion of China is still, in many ways, very distant. If you haven't been, you don't know. You read the same kinds of articles over and over again, and it's very frustrating because people say, well, really, they have clubs there? You actually can, you can get a green salad, or you can, it's just, so I find that the gap between the perception and the reality is so huge. And there is a gap, I would say, between the Chinese perception of America and the reality, except the gap is much less because Chinese know they've been isolated for a long time, and they are so curious and so hungry for information. So they keep up. Like I told you, the cast from High School Musical, they know what's going on. Can Americans talk about who the rock stars in China are? I don't think so. Can we even talk about who the leaders are? Do people even know who the leaders of China are today? I don't think so. Many, many Chinese students, they graduate from high school and they can reel off all the presidents that have served America. Now, why is there such a huge difference? So this is disturbing to me, and I decided that what I can do is I can show why people are attracted to China. Those who do go, I've taken many people over there for the first time, a lot of directors and actors and writers and whatnot, and they go and they're amazed. They cannot believe this is the same China that they read about in the newspaper, and they love it. They love it. I talk to people on the planes all the time. What do you think? They're, have some business deal. People generally love it. And so what is this gap about? So this film is about, in this case, because this is another interesting phenomenon, is a Chinese American lawyer who he works at a very fancy, prestigious New York law firm, and he wants to make partner. That's the track he's on. He's like, I'm going to make partner. He's very ambitious. And he's called into his boss's office one day, and he thinks this is the day he's going to get partnership. And they say, guess what, Sam? His name is Sam Chow. We're sending you to China. And he's really taken aback. He's like, well, why me? He said, well, you're young, you're ambitious, and you're Chinese. And he's like, well, I don't really speak Chinese, and I'm really more comfortable in New York. But he lo and behold, he has to go. This is what they want him to do. So he arrives in China. He knows very little. He doesn't speak Chinese. He doesn't speak the language. And he knows very little about it. and he has to get acclimated. So I'm going to show you 3 scenes. And the one thing you need to know so you understand the last of the 3 scenes is that he gets into a big mess with one of his clients. His client has a design for a really cool cell phone. You don't see that scene. So he finds out that another Chinese manufacturer is already selling this phone. So he comes out, he calls a meeting with this Chinese manufacturer, and the Chinese manufacturer brings this tall British man in and says, "This is my lawyer," okay? Just remember that part. When you see a tall man in a suit, that's who he just had a meeting with, and he thinks he's a lawyer. So without further ado, I'm going to show you these clips about this Chinese-American lawyer named Sam Chow, who is greeted at the airport by an American so-called relocation specialist. Her name is Amanda. And she and he are the ones, most of the scenes are between them that you'll see, okay? So that's the latest oeuvre. I hope when it hits theaters, you will look for it. American Shanghai. And the goal was to make a film that was acceptable and could be truly appreciated by people on both sides of the Pacific. We worked really hard to maintain some reality and authenticity for the Chinese audience. We had a lot of Chinese who were involved, and a lot of Westerners, obviously. There are other key Chinese characters. I just didn't want to introduce too many to confuse you, so I tried to keep it connected in terms of what the scenes that you're seeing. But there are some prominent Chinese characters in the film. It's probably about 25% in Chinese as well. And most people say it can't be done, that films are either big American films that can play in China and the rest of the world, but that you really can't make a film with Chinese content that sort of is seen on both sides. So I'm trying to prove either the impossible or the very challenging. But yes.
It seems like a terrific film.
Thank you.
Little we saw.
Thank you.
Very, very, very
well,
good.
I think it is, I'm very proud of it, I have to say. It was a first-time writer-director named Daniel Shaw. Yes.
That's what I want to ask. I mean, we know what a competitive market it is, how difficult it is to make films today that aren't typical animation for kids or a certain demographic. So how was it to raise money for this, and how was it to get it going, and what's the strategy to make it pay for itself?
Never easy. It's never easy. We had private investors in America and a Chinese company, the China Film Group, which is the largest production distribution company in China, Zhongguo Dingyin Jituan, for those of you who know, is an investor in the film, and they have all Chinese rights. That's what when Daniel came to me, he had a script that was this basic idea, but it was very different. We did many, many, many drafts, 50-some drafts together, because I felt it was really important, again, not to use China as a place to poke fun, or even America, but just to have reality-based humor. For instance, there was he was pretty insistent, and until he finally changed, that when the lawyer first arrives in China, he is given an apartment with a squat toilet. There are squat toilets in China, many, everywhere. But I said, there's just no way in Shanghai that this lawyer from a top law firm would be taken to an apartment with a squat toilet, right? It's just unrealistic. And if you lose the audience with that lack of credibility, then I think you lose them for maybe the rest of the film. You just can't, why would he be in that? There are so many beautiful apartments in Shanghai. It's just not. So he eventually did change it. There are many, many little things like that. So, to me, it was so important that it had a certain level of veracity. We are eking out, so how do we get it? The biggest handicap is we do have Bill Paxton in the movie. You didn't see him today. He's the biggest star in it. It would have helped if we had more stars, but it was actually very difficult. There are some actors in China. We did meet one who are very big in China, but who are actually born and raised in North America. It came out at lunch, I think, that one of them was very interested in this movie. His name is Wang Lihong. He's a big pop star in China. And he wanted to do it, and ultimately, because of scheduling and his management team and all that, he couldn't do the movie. So there were other actors that were presented to us that could not be convincing as Chinese Americans. They spoke with an accent or whatever. So again, that level of veracity meant that we went with someone, Daniel Henney, who happens to be a big star in Korea, but not yet in other parts of the world. We felt it was more important to go with someone who was convincing and who I think could be a very big star here. He was in X-Men, Wolverine, and whatnot. So we are doing everything we can. Actually, we're going to have to build both a grassroots campaign. We'll try to go to festivals. We have a wonderful composer that's coming on board. His music's not in here, named Klaus Badelt, who actually was one of the, he was the only foreign composer that worked on the Olympics. He also did Pirates of the Caribbean, along with lots of other films. So doing everything we can to build a team. It will have to be a mission again, and an act of love and dedication, because it's not going to be one of those things you can just throw up on 3,000 screens. It will have to build its audience. But I think films, I'm hoping that the curiosity about China is really helping fuel this. And I think in a lot of ways it's like a primer on Shanghai, because in it we take you to a number of wonderful locations, and we try to show what it's like for someone who's going there for the first time and might feel awkward in certain situations. Yes.
Hey, thanks for showing the movies. It makes me miss Shanghai. I was studying in Shanghai for years.
Oh, yeah.
Just wondering, if you feel the movie in Lujiazui, such high density population area, really crowded, and also the narrow street. And what about the people who pass by? Are they interested? Are they friendly, working?
When we were shooting in Lujiazui in the oh, definitely. We needed a crew of people to it's what's called the assistant directing department, the AD department. We have to coordinate. You have to get permission. First of all, you have to shoot there, and then you have police help, and you have to have your own people that basically are making sure no one's on camera, and you have to keep them away. In certain scenes, we wanted people walking. We just had to keep reminding people, don't look at the camera, don't look at the camera. So that's a common, people often want to look. If they're just walking by, there are other scenes we shot in Lujiazui where there are people around, and we just had to tell them, don't look at the camera. Sometimes we planted our own extras there, and sometimes we just used the people on the street. But it was a lot of fun to shoot in Shanghai. And generally, we were very impressed. We shot a lot on the Waitan, on the Bund, and there's a lot of people there, but they were so obedient. And I think we were told there's probably a lot of people from Weidi, people from other parts of China there. So they just sat there very, very obediently. We said, okay, stop, don't move because we're shooting this part now. And then we said, okay, now go to that part because we're shooting over here. And so it definitely does require, but it was quite, I've shot in Shanghai now. First time was Empire of the Sun. We shot there a little bit for Joy Luck Club. I shot the movie, the High School Musical in Shanghai. And I do love the city. I think it's very cinematic. But back in the 80s, it was, it was easier to shut things down because the government said, we're doing this movie, so everybody has to comply, and you get people from the work units, and you get the police involved. Now you have to negotiate with every individual proprietor. But it was still, we had really quite a good location manager and people who had relationships, of course. And I was very pleased with the locations they were able to come up with, because most people have not been able to shoot on the Bund. So we were very fortunate. Yes, sir. Yes, first.
Yeah, earlier you had mentioned, or you had said the word authenticity, and I was wondering what you meant by that. And from watching the scenes that you've shown to us tonight, I just wonder what sort of politically rife things can be said about what you have said about authenticity and about the sort of images that you have shown of Shanghai, which appears to be quite affluent and really modernized and developed. But I know that I just came back from China, and I know that not all of China looks like that either. And so, going back to the question of what authenticity means.
Trying to figure out your question. On the one hand, I hear you saying, are you saying that we were under a lot of pressure to show a modern Shanghai? Because we show, other parts of the film show a completely different Shanghai. I mean, there are scenes in the Nongtang. There's one of the main characters is Sam's Chinese assistant. And we follow her home one day, and she lives in a very, very modest environment. So it's a little bit about the contrast of her having this job where she feels she has to wear Hermes scarves, but she actually is living very, very modestly with her home. So we try to show an array. Now, Sam's world is primarily going to be, you know, it's still seen through his eyes. So his world takes him primarily to a more affluent part of Shanghai. So again, it tries to be true to the story. We're neither trying to show Shanghai more, more elegant than it is, nor much less. It really is, we have some scenes that are just on a street where they're selling cell phones, and they go and buy baozi on the street, you know, street food. So it attempts to have a real mix. But the Shanghai, again, that Sam would experience and is exposed to is a more modern Shanghai, given the nature of his job.
And so my question was basically, how do you reconcile with, you know, showing authentically an image of a place? Because even if you show that Shanghai is affluent and developed in this aspect, the other aspects are also gone, because again, you're talking about coming from a perspective of somebody who's an American going to China,
right?
And how that also again recreates or reproduces this image of China.
Right, and when I say authentic, I mean authentic to the story. It is the experience of this person in Shanghai. This is not a documentary that's meant to show the full spectrum of everyone's experience in China, which would be impossible to do anyway. You have to choose, right? So you have to choose. So we didn't show the squat toilets because that wouldn't be authentic to his experience. We are showing him in a very beautiful apartment because that would be what would happen. So we do have a mix. We have another Chinese journalist, so you see him in his workplace. So the characters that pop, these are choices that you make as a filmmaker. And if you were a filmmaker and you wanted to write about a peasant, then you could do that, and you would probably just, you know, there's plenty of films that show just the life of peasants in China, and you could say, well, is that authentic because there's this whole other China? Or, you know, there's wonderful documentaries made, or, you know, films choose. You put your lens on a place and a time, and that's your choice. But I'm saying what time and place we're showing should be authentic to the story that we're telling. So we're not telling the story of a Chinese peasant or a factory worker or whatever. We're telling the story of an American goes there, and it's a life that most people don't know too much about. Did I answer your question satisfactorily?
This is related actually to his question, maybe. How much, what is the balance in how do you propose to market this? Primarily to Americans, to Chinese? And if you're going to market it to Chinese, how much, what effect will that have, does that have on your direction and of course your
there are different markets. So there is a distributor in China already, as I mentioned, China Film Group, and they will distribute in China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and what they call the Greater China area. So for them, the marketing is really, I will have less to do with the marketing of the movie. That we want to promote it. We help them promote by bringing the actors in and being able to do press and whatnot. But the design of poster and the trailer or whatever, the choice of release dates, we can somewhat influence, but we're not in control. So that is, if you're talking about Chinese in China, is that what you mean?
Well, yes, I'm wondering how, knowing that this is going to be marketed in China, has that had any effect on how you directed it and how you...
As I said, we were attempting to make a film that would be acceptable and appreciated by Chinese audiences and Western audiences. I just returned from China where I showed them a cut of the movie, and they generally liked it very much. And now they had to approve the script first, so this process has been going on for many, many months. They, as well as they being the Chinese Film Distribution Company, as well as what's called SARF, the Guangdianju, the State Administration of Radio, Film, and Television, has to approve all scripts. They approve things at 3 different stages. So you first present a script. You say, this is a movie I want to shoot. And then you tell them who you have in mind to act in it. And then they give you or do not give you a permit. Now, there's 2 ways to shoot films in China with Chinese participation. One is called a xiepai, which is an assisted production. One is a hepai, which is co-production. So assisted production, you just go there, like Kill Bill was shot in China as an assisted production. It was way too violent a movie to be shown in China, but they just said, we just want to use the backdrop and some actors and some crew and whatever. And Quentin Tarantino had a wonderful time spending 8 months in China shooting that movie, and people knew about it, but it was not going to be a Chinese movie. Crouching Tiger is considered a co-production, so that was a movie shot with Chinese participation, Chinese investment, and in China, it's a Chinese movie. That movie in China did not do nearly as well as it did outside of China, which was a big surprise to everyone because it was all in Chinese language. So at the time, people assumed that would be a big movie in China, and they thought it was iffy outside of China. This tells you that it's very difficult to predict the audiences. Ang Lee's other movie, Se Jie, Lust Caution, did not do well outside of China, did very well in China. It was very racy, and it did very well until the government decided to pull it from the theaters. So, you know, you can't predict. You really can't predict. So I say, go for it. And I mean, look, I could try to be a producer like Jerry Bruckheimer and make Pearl Harbor, and you don't risk $100 million and say, oh, I'm not absolutely sure if the Chinese, you know, which is the bigger audience. You have to have a budget, and ours was very, very modest. That is commensurate to the amount of risk and reward that you think will come in. So I have chosen in some cases to work in this smaller space because for me the gratification comes from exploring other themes and stories and characters that couldn't otherwise be done on a huge scale. You know, if this were a $100 million movie, I'd say, forget it, there's no hope. But it's not. So I'm hoping, thinking that through word of mouth and obviously some advertising promotion that people will catch on. And they'll enjoy this journey to China. Did I answer your question? I'm sorry, you asked something else?
Yes, I just have one more. How did High School Musical go down? I thought it was a blast. Yesterday was a mind-blowing double feature.
Between High School Musical and Dark Matter. High School Musical was another experiment. It's the first time that a studio decided to take a very well-known, well-oiled franchise and tailor-make it for the Chinese audience. And when they brought me on, actually, I recommended the director that I worked with on Dark Matter because he had a very strong music and dance background. I would say there are strengths and weaknesses to that project, and I'm glad the audience yesterday seemed to enjoy it because I think it's very enjoyable. I felt it's one of the weakest areas in China right now in my mind is screenwriting, because this whole idea of a 3-act structure is not that familiar or well absorbed yet in China. The literary tradition in China, this is my theory, has been more in the oral tradition and stories. If you look at the novels that were written in China, they can just go on and on and on rambling. You look at Monkey King, it's got however many hundreds of episodes. So this idea that you want to have a strict 3-act structure is not that familiar, and it's difficult to find writers to write that. So I personally think in High School Musical, the song and dance is wonderful, and the story maybe is a little weak. But there were 2 other issues that came up on that. One is the disagreements that Disney had with the Chinese distributor. And this is just about different strategies and markets. So the Chinese distributor felt very strongly that in order for this film to succeed, the actors had to become famous first, that so many films are sold on the fame of the actors. And given that we could not find anybody famous who could sing, dance, and act and be convincing as a college student, there were relative unknowns, right? So who is that? What is that? And we couldn't hire people from Hunan Weishi, Hunan Satellite, because they were big competitors with Huayi Brothers and Shanghai Wenguang, Shanghai Media Group. So we were really, there were just no big stars that could be cast. So the Huayi Brothers' idea was to take these 6 actors and have them form a group, a music group, a band basically, and have them perform all over China and take them on the road and sell them as this group first and then say, oh, guess what? This group happens to be in High School Musical. Disney did not like that idea because in their minds and their experience, High School Musical itself was a big enough brand to sell. And why not just sell as High School Musical? They were back and forth, literally for months and months and months and months. And then at the 11th hour, Huayi Brothers, which was the distributor and supposed marketer of the film, said, you know what, Disney, we can't agree, you market the film. And Disney had never marketed a film before. So the film, I think, really suffered. Those who've seen the film really enjoyed it. But people kept saying, when is the movie coming out? And I was like, oh, it already came out. So it didn't do extremely well in China. And people just didn't know when it came out. There are some people that would say Chinese audiences don't want to see musicals on film. That may or may not be true. There have been several, and so far none have done well. But I'm not sure, because there are a lot of TV shows that are American Idol type shows, reality TV shows, and they seem to love those. So I keep thinking, why wouldn't that interest transfer to film? So the film overall box office is not great. It kind of, after the fact, weirdly, it just come out in DVD and seems to have gotten much more press now. I suspect there will be a lot of DVD sales and rentals, and then here it's on Apple TV now, or whatever. So just recently, there was a lot of press about High School Musical. This movie was made in 2009 and came out in 2010. So you don't know. This is the thing. People anticipated it to be a big hit because they thought, oh, you can't lose High School Musical. So that's why everything is a risk. Everything's a risk. Truly, we live in a world of a lot of unknowns. And, if you don't like unknowns and uncertainty, then you should not even dip your toe in this crazy business.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have two questions. The first is, why did you choose to set your story in Shanghai versus Beijing? And the second one is, as someone who is from Beijing but has lived primarily an expat lifestyle there, I think a lot of the humor in the movie comes from understanding both of the cultures and understanding both of the languages. And you said that it's about a quarter of it's filmed in Chinese. And I think a lot of, on both sides, a lot of the idioms are not transferable to another language. So how are you planning to sort of convey that to an audience that is either primarily Chinese speaking or primarily English speaking?
Actually, we've screened it for people who have no knowledge of China on a number of occasions. And surprisingly, they seem to respond. Maybe it takes intelligence. There were a lot of people who they could just follow. I think there is something about seeing something just exotic enough, but just familiar enough. I try to analyze this, and so they're going on a journey to a place they don't know, but you can kind of relate to the guy. I mean, he's not. To me, there's nothing that's that difficult to understand about his situation. And so the hope is, that for Chinese, they'll see some things that are familiar and some things that are a little different. And for Westerners, they'll see things that are familiar and different. And I don't think it really, we obviously will have subtitles in most places. Actually, it's a good question about the taxi scene. I think, what did we decide? Maybe no subtitles, because you can sort of figure out, you might, for those who don't understand. So different people will experience the film in different ways, and that's okay. It's not like everybody. People laugh at different things. I think you guys seem to like the taxi thing. There's a lot of different kinds of jokes throughout, and some will be funnier to some people than others, and nobody has to like the exact same things about the film. Did I answer your question? I go off on tangent. Is that what you're saying? How are we going to market? We're going to market it as a romantic comedy, basically. It's a romantic comedy, and it happens to takes place in China. Oh, in Shanghai. You asked about why did we not set in Beijing? Well, first of all, the script came to me, and it was set in Shanghai, and he felt that Shanghai is more international, and there is it may not be large in terms of numbers, but the expat community and the fact that it has, historically, been a place where a lot of Westerners went made it more appropriate. It's also extremely cinematic, and the fact that it is modern, the whole Pudong area, whatever, it just is a different view of China. We had the same debate with High School Musical. Should we shoot in Beijing? Should we shoot in Shanghai? It's just like New York is a very cinematic city because it's very compact. It's condensed, so you can get a lot of flavor in one frame. That's a lot of the reason. Beijing is very spread out, and it's hard to capture as much variety in one frame. Yes?
Actually, I'd like to respond to that point and the other points. I felt like, as someone watching the film and being able to speak and understand both languages, it actually made the jokes richer, but didn't necessarily detract from the viewing experience. And previously there was a question about the marketing of this film to different people. I think the language is actually a very good bifurcation for each audience. And so each audience comes in, and depending on the background and language they speak, they get something different from the film. And if you are able to speak both, then you get to enjoy the subtle flavor of the constant miscommunication that happens between like English and Chinese. You get to like understand this guy's confusion and maybe live it as well.
I mean, it just, you know, again, people might have thought, I use the example of Joy Luck Club, people said, that's such a narrow story, it's just about Chinese women. Well, yes and no, because afterwards, Greeks and Italians and Russians, whatever, people said, oh, I could so relate to this, my mother's just like that character, or whatever. So you try to find universality in the specifics, you know, and I think most of us have experienced not being able to speak the language somewhere, and there's miscommunication, and then jumping to conclusions like, well, you know, that must mean whatever. You know, you're trying to constantly read body language, and that just happens. So it doesn't have to be just about an American in China. It could be about anyone anywhere. Well,
when do you think your frustration and like, what the different misunderstandings will end? And do you think it ever will end?
Well, it's always a process. I don't think there'll ever be complete understanding and, you know, or complete misunderstanding. I think the best thing is for people to just go. We were having some discussion earlier today, and I said the second you go, oh, okay, it doesn't take much to just arrive and have an experience and kind of get what the place is about for a lot of people. I know Jocelyn, who's been spending a lot of time with us, has spent some time there, and although her parents think it's still a fearful place, you know, they're concerned about her, you know, it's, I guess my hope is that, first of all, that some of the deeply embedded stereotypes get dissolved, you know, because I have experienced what it was like for me, really, it got to a point after I lived in Beijing for a year. I remember being at the Peking Hotel and being in an elevator, and this busload of American tourists got off the bus. Now, back then, first of all, if you took a tour to China, you were very wealthy and you had a lot of time on your hands. So very old people, generally, very wealthy people. And I felt like the circus had arrived. These women in these bouffant hairdos with tons of makeup and really brightly colored clothes. And I had been living in Beijing and been wearing, you know, just seen a lot of blue and gray. And I really, it was such a jarring experience. I said, oh my God, these people came from the place where I grew up, but suddenly they seemed so freakish to me. I had so gotten used to the neutral colors of China and really looking at people's faces more closely, and everything seemed really extreme. So it's, you know, you adjust your perceptions and your thinking, and it was interesting to suddenly feel like I was Chinese looking out into the world of Caucasians. And I feel this all, you know, I go there all the time, and I'm just kind of always sliding back and forth somewhere, like where do I stand on this? And I can easily identify with American, I can easily identify with Chinese. So, and you know, at a certain point, it's not even about the race anymore, it's more about a kind of consciousness. And I have a number of friends who might be from all different races, but somehow we are aligned in our thinking about things, and then the racial issue just kind of even disappears. But it was at one time in China a very, very stark issue. And I was extremely self-conscious about being with a Caucasian person on the street because I got stared at. And they always made me sign in when other people didn't have to sign in. And, you know, I have friends who were born and raised in China who are Caucasian. A friend, Andy Friend is his name, and he speaks perfect Beijinghua, Beijing dialect. You know, it's just crazy, like with the ers and everything. And people they're just tickled pink. You know, they can't believe he can speak such good Chinese. And I laugh at that experience. But then if people, as has happened, have come up to me and say, "Oh my God, your English is so good," I'll get insulted, right? But why should I feel insulted? They see something different. They see Andy as being different. And I have to tell you a really funny story. Another friend who was actually, who's in the same situation, this woman, she's on CCTV all the time. She grew up in China, speaks perfect Chinese. Her name is Aihua. And she and her mother are in the elevator, and they're speaking Chinese because they often do, because that's, you know, they're very, very comfortable in Chinese. They speak perfect Chinese. and they're in the elevator with some other Chinese, and they get out of the elevator, and then she overhears the Chinese talking to his friend. He said, 他妈的，我现在懂英文. Which is like, man, shit, I suddenly understand English. So, you know, it's just, that was like that scene with in the restaurant where you see, it's like, you know, she keeps talking to the Chinese person. So Chinese Americans often go and they're in that situation. They don't understand Chinese, but, you know, they're constantly getting talked at as if they did. You know, so it's just, people carry around baggage, you know, and you can't help it. And all you can do is laugh at it sometimes. Yes?
So I think this movie would be very successful in China. First, I think it's a very good introduction of Shanghai to Americans, and also it's a comics, and Chinese people love comics. And also I have a question is that so in this movie will you also intro the Asian Chinese culture remain in the modern China, or you just intro the
is there ancient Chinese culture? There's a little ancient Chinese thinking, not too much ancient Chinese culture per se, but I think to me, the most touching story, I'll just give you a little hint, so to whet your appetite. So one of the intriguing stories is her name is Feng Feng. She is the assistant. She's very beautiful. She's played by this actress named Zhu Zhu. Feng Feng, Zhu Zhu, I like repeating names. She plays the assistant to Sam, and she's trying to help him, but he thinks that she's flirting with him, and you know, she's saying, Sam, you know, this is how they do it in China, and she's trying to help him, and it turns out, gosh, do I give it away or not? Anyway, it turns out she comes from a very humble background, and she's actually trying to go to law school to help her parents, to support her parents. She wants to have a real career. Her parents are very, very humble background, you know, and there's a little bit of a love story between them. And so, yes, a little bit of the traditional, maybe not ancient, but it's a little bit some of the traditional Chinese values. And also, the movie is actually narrated by a Chinese journalist. And he is more of his name is Wang Gei Li. And Gei Li is an expression in China which means awesome. So in English, everybody knows him they call him Awesome Wang, Wang Gei Li. And he keeps hearing about Wang Gei Li is so cool, Wang Gei Li is this. So he has all these images again. So we show actually some scenes of Wang Gei Li. I'm sorry, I don't have this to show you. But we show some scenes of Wang Gei Li shot in a film noirish kind of thing where he's wearing this long coat and he's got a hat and he helps this, you know, girls off the street, and you see these silhouettes of him knocking down bad guys, you know, it's done in sort of that 30s style film noir. So Sam is hearing about Wang Gei Li. There's some fantasy sequences. It's all like Sam imagining things. There's a fantasy sequence when he's told he's first going to China. He has this image of this really old man with a chicken on the side of a road, you know. So this Wang Gei Li character he's built up as a very cool character, and he actually turns out to be someone completely different. But, you know, so we play on that. The whole idea was to try and take stereotypes and turn them on their head, because it's just, you know, it's rarely what you think. So there's a lot of things in here about, oh, you think it's this, oh no, it's that, or whatever. So. Yes.
I'm just wondering, what are the differences like of your filmmaking experience in China versus in States? Because I happen to be working as a assistant producer during the summer on the Chinese film, so I was like really curious about what's that. 春娇与志明。彭浩翔。谁？彭浩翔是 Hong Kong director.
Oh, I see. Have you worked on American films?
Not yet.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, there are a lot of things I could say about this. I obviously like making films in China because I keep finding myself doing it again and again, and I really feel that it's something that not everyone can do. Like I can work in Hollywood, and I feel like just one of any number of producers, but when I go to China, I guess I feel like I'm contributing something a little different because I can't speak the language, because I can bring Hollywood experience there. It is different, and sometimes I take I've sort of done pre-production with directors there, and I try to prepare them. Here are some of the things that I say. Number one, the crews work very, very, very hard, and they will lay down their lives for you if you respect them. There's no unions, so it is typical to work 7 days a week, which is unheard of in the States. You can't do it, or you could pay them a ridiculous amount of overtime, so people think. It's not atypical to go very, very long days and get up and shoot the next day. The hours are too long. I insist on taking a break. I would never do that. I would say there are some departments that are very, very good and other departments that are weaker. The departments that I think are extremely strong are in like the art departments, costume, wardrobe, hair, makeup is pretty good. All the set construction, props can be very good. The departments that are much weaker are on production management. Chinese don't like paperwork as much as Westerners. Westerners are like crazy about paperwork, and Chinese don't like paperwork. Accounting's very different because this whole idea of cash flow and how much you pay out each week, and Chinese filmmakers are used to just getting a big bag of cash and then they just start doling it out, and that's their whole accounting process. The weakest department in China right now, I think, is the assistant director. They do not understand how to schedule, and I might be getting too technical, but so and script supervisor is very hard to find. I found a really good one, and I will hang on to her for dear life, especially one that's bilingual, and they have to keep track of, make a lot of notes about every take and everything like that. It takes more bodies to get the same job done, but if you want to solve a problem, you basically throw more bodies at it and it gets done. Things are a little bit more crisis oriented. So it's a little bit less planning, but more hard work in a strange way, I would say. Those are just some of the things I have noticed. But there's a great sense of camaraderie, as there can be on films in the West. Oh, here's the one big difference: craft services and catering. The food on Hollywood movie sets has gotten ridiculous. It's like a Top Chef competition or something. It was just people roll out ridiculous. I mean, and not just the meals, but the craft services. So you could spend all day long just standing by the snack table and feeding yourself, and it's gotten ridiculous. I mean, it's like a huge part of the budget. In China, there's the first day of High School Musical. The lead actress came to me and said, "You guys are so nice to us. You have free tea." We had tea and water. I felt so bad. I was like, yeah, sorry, because our production manager did not let us have more snacks. She said, if you put snacks out, people get used to it, and they're just going to take it home and do this and that. So I was like, oh, you're welcome for the tea. It was very touching, that whole set. We had some great dancers, and one thing that I tend to do in every production is if it's your birthday in the course of pre-production production, I will give you a cake and everybody sing happy birthday. Just think it's a cute little thing. And this dancer on High School Musical, one of the best male dancers, he really jumps out. You may have noticed, really cute. His name is Jason. He grew up in the Shaolin Temple, and he never, he said, this is the first time I've ever had my own birthday celebration. He's never had a cake. And we gave them Nike sneakers. We got a bunch of sneakers from Nike. He said, I've never worn a brand name sneaker before. So these stories are very touching to me. And so the movies can be a very, very big experience for them. It's it's kind of a big deal. There's not that many movies being made yet. And especially if you're, I think the system has gotten a little bit too top-heavy, so it's the same big directors that are working again and again and again. And I would love to see more younger directors and actors come up. It's a little, a little bit too much for the privileged few. Anybody else? Yes, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.